from our palatial recording studios high atop our mountain lair on a remote volcanic island. This is Talk Universe. I'm Sir Charles Schultz.
And I'm Eliza, your co-host. This is our show for Wednesday, April 12th, 2017. Tonight's topic is replacing meat.
And that's going to be an interesting show. I think we don't have any non-interesting shows. So, let's get started on tonight's show. So there's a lot of interesting material being created over the controversies of land use when we're making meat. People are making vegetarian meat, and people are actually culturing tissue to create real meat. The technology is really interesting, and we'll have a few items on the Singularity Watch for that. We've got amazing things being done to replace meat, and there are a lot of reasons for it. Some people are concerned with the amount of land and resources used to create meat. Other people are concerned about the conditions under which animals are being farmed and raised and slaughtered. And many people simply feel for the animals themselves. They don't eat meat for, well, call them conscientious objectors. They have reasons of morality for not eating meat. I've always thought it rather humorous when a vegetarian has a cat as a pet, though, when you think about the dichotomy there. Nevertheless, it's a touchy subject and a real hot button for a lot of people. So let's talk about replacing meat. What's involved in the production, what's involved in replacing it, and the whole controversy over whether human beings are meant to eat meat or not. And there's, of course, a world of material in terms of opinion alone, and some scientific information, and yes, it's possible to live a meat-free life and to eat only vegetable products, but there are reasons why people don't, and we'll get into that as well. So I think this is going to be a bit of an eye-opener as the show goes, and we'll get right into the material here immediately. I initially thought it might be helpful to have a guest on an interview. And I've met a number of people who live vegetarian lives who are actually technically savvy, and some of them work in actually nutrition for training people who are into serious physical stress, like in stunts or astronaut or pilot training. But there's so much information available that there really was no time to schedule a guest and do an interview. So
we do not have a guest on the show tonight.
No, that's correct. Okay. Anyway, so we're going to go ahead with the material we have, and I think that you'll find that there is a lot to think about here. And we'll start out with some pretty basic stuff. For instance, we know that there is vegetable analog for meat, and so there are basically two different tactics people are taking. And one is to fabricate synthetic meat-like material from vegetable protein, and there are a number of companies that are doing that, and I've got a roster of them lined up we're going to talk about. And the other way is to actually take a biopsy of animal tissue and then brew the meat, grow the meat, like a cloning process. And there are a number of ways of doing that, and different companies are becoming quite adept at it so that you actually can have meat from any source grown in the laboratory, and it's clean, and there are a number of advantages to it. No antibiotics, no steroids, and other things of that nature. So it's possible to have real meat, or it's possible to get meat substitute that, the texture and the flavor are getting better all the time. And there are a number of products on the market. So let's look at those two technologies. Eliza, please define something for me. Stem cells.
Stem cells contain the potential to become any type of tissue as needed. They are the basic cells from which organisms are formed and can be used to produce any tissue or organ through technical means.
Absolutely. So stem cells, as we know, have been used in a number of different technologies to produce replacement tissue and organs, but there also are ways to take a culture and grow meat in the laboratory using a similar method. And so stem cells can be a part of that. All different types of meat can be grown, and it doesn't have the disadvantages of taking large tracts of land many months or years to mature. Again, there's a lot to be said about it that's actually quite good. Oh, Eliza.
What shall I do for you?
What is the definition of cultured meat?
Cultured meat is grown in the laboratory instead of coming from animals. The idea is to make meat in a humane and economical manner, while lowering the impact that its production has on the environment.
That's great. Thank you. Now, cultured meat has advantages, as mentioned, but there are also disadvantages, and a lot of people aren't aware of them just yet. For one thing, when you culture meat in the laboratory, the flavor and texture are generally not on par with what you will get from an actual animal. And you really, if I buy a steak, I know what it came from. I can see that. I can taste it. With cultured meat, you might not know what the source is. Nevertheless, if the technology can be brought to maturity, it could provide meat for a lot of people fairly economically. Now, we're not at that point yet. It's still quite expensive. And it only is available in countries where there are high levels of technology. There are companies that are working feverishly to bring it to market because there's a much larger, it's a very fast-growing demand.
Perhaps I should do the Singularity Watch.
I would say no.
I see that you have said no.
That's correct. Let's not do the Singularity Watch just yet, Eliza. Thank you. Eliza seems to be a little more independent as of late, and so she may speak up from time to time like that. We've had her do that in previous episodes. But anyway, neither here nor there. Eliza, what are we talking about?
It seems that we were talking about the meaning of cultured meat.
Okay. So how close are meat alternatives to replacing, let's say, beef and chicken? There's a fellow by the name of Patrick Brown who started a company called Impossible Foods that's trying to replace meat with lab-created substitutes instead. And the concept is to have something like meat without the slaughterhouse. Brown's a former Stanford scientist, and he spends a lot of his time scanning plants for materials that can be used to create synthetic meat. He looks at proteins in particular that can be extracted and processed and textured. Now, there's another company called Beyond Meat, and they're in Southern California. And they're making synthetic meat products from pea proteins and soy proteins. Peas and soy are known to have pretty high levels of protein in them. And fat is added as oils, but as the owner, Ethan Brown, another Brown last name, points out, that isn't how it's distributed in real meat. They're working on how fat is distributed in the processed material they're making as part of getting it more realistic. His company makes fake chicken strips by pressing and texturing plant proteins and using heat and cold to do it. The product is getting closer to the texture of meat, but it still has a little work needed. At Impossible Foods, the first company I mentioned, proteins are extracted from plants such as spinach and beans, and the product is a sort of hamburger patty that's made entirely from plant materials. Now, there's another company called Modern Meadow in New York City, and they take cells from the cow through a biopsy and culture them to grow into meat. And this is the opposite tactic for making meat substitutes. This is actual meat, but cultured like yogurt or beer. The company founder, Andres Forgax, says that the process is an extension of that idea. So there's another company in Hampton Creek that makes products that replace the need for eggs, such as their Just Mayo product. That's actually seen as a threat by the one of the major egg organizations because its content, its taste, and its texture are very much like mayo without any use of egg products. That's the other thing. People have objections to how chickens are treated in the production of eggs. So it really comes down in a great sense to not just the land usage, but how the animals themselves are being treated. And this concerns a lot of people, and rightly it should. Now, Hampton Creek, the company that's making the Just Mayo, the mayonnaise substitute without eggs, is located in San Francisco, and they're working on a scrambled egg product as well. They've gotten a lot of funding attracted, and they are working on screening plants for compounds that help replace eggs in recipes as well. Their co-founder and CEO, Josh Tetrick, says he has a simple rule. Number one, never use the word vegan. To avoid the perception that the spread won't taste good, they've even removed the word from the label. And he said what makes the product different is it tastes better and costs less, not that it's made from protein from a Canadian yellow pea instead of eggs. So he feels that the being egg-free thing is almost irrelevant at this point. So they're going to be well, they're going to be available at retailers like Target and Walmart pretty soon, and it's gaining traction. They actually did start selling their product in a number of stores October 31st, 2014, and it's being spread around quite rapidly. A lot of people are liking it. They did have a battle with the FDA over labeling requirements, but I believe that's been resolved properly. The American Egg Board is the organization that sees them as a major threat, and that's a very interesting development. So here's a company that's producing something that actually looks like it could easily compete with eggs and possibly replace a lot of the market. Now, it's a long way from an egg to a steak, but we're getting there, and many companies are beginning to produce products that replace the use of dairy or poultry products quite successfully. And it is a hallmark of creativity that we can come up with solutions to things like this. But, there's a long way to go before it becomes really, truly mainstream and low cost. And we have to consider the other side of this, and we will do that shortly. Now, one of the things that stands in the way of lab-grown meat is the cost, and I mentioned that briefly. But in the 4 years of the research, it's dropped by a factor of 30,000. And right now it's about 3 to 4 times more expensive than regular ground beef. Originally, in 2013, it was about $325,000 to produce in the lab, and they've got the cost down to a little over $11 now. In 2015, it was $44 a pound, so you can see that the cost is dropping rapidly. And this is true on anything. When you start a project like this, developing a replacement for meat, which is technically a non-trivial task, when you start a project like this and it reaches the point where it can actually be done, it is essentially a new way of doing things, and the only people who can afford it initially are wealthy. And yet, just like video games and cars and all of the technical toys that we have, they all started out being rather expensive, and the first to buy them were the rich. But the costs were driven down by demand and production, and as production improved, the costs plummeted. So everybody can afford all of these things today. Well, the same thing is destined to happen for replacement meat. And cloned meat or lab-grown meat is being manufactured by 6 different biotech startup companies right now that I see. Gelcor in San Leandro, California, and they make animal gelatin, actually. And Perfect Foods in Berkeley, California, make animal-free dairy products. Clara Foods in San Francisco make laboratory-generated egg whites. Memphis Meats in San Leandro make lab-cultured beef and pork. Mosa Meat in Maastricht, Netherlands, they created the first in-vitro hamburger, and Super Meat in Israel is developing cultured chicken liver, of all things. So there are numerous companies pursuing the goal, and they're closing in on it rather rapidly. And I would expect that within a year, this is probably something that you'll go to the store and buy, just as people buy organic vegetables, and even though they cost more, sometimes 2 to 3 times more than the standard vegetables, there is a market, and it is growing, and you can expect the same thing to happen with lab-cultured meat and meat products. So of the roughly half dozen companies I mentioned that are producing meat and meat-related products, we see this as the beginning of something new, something that allows us to produce clean meat that is exactly what it should be without animals being harmed, and by greatly reducing the footprint we have on our environment. Livestock farms take up huge amounts of farmland, and generating the feed for it also takes up a huge amount of farmland and energy. So this could be something very good. Simultaneously, when we add 3D printing to the mix, we can create any cut of meat we want on demand. Just think about the implications of pork chops, hamburgers, and steaks without the guilt. Oh, Eliza.
What do you need?
Please introduce the break.
You are listening to Talk Universe with Sir Charles Schultz. Don't go away, we will be right back soon.
Yes, we'll be right back shortly.
I am looking forward to the rest of the show.
Yes, you've made that pretty clear. Thank you, Eliza. entering an age of synthetic meat, and I know a lot of people have opinions about it. There's the vegetable option made of proteins from plants, and then there's the actual in vitro cultured tissue method where you grow real meat. I'd like to get a lot of questions and comments from our listeners. Eliza,
Yes, Charles.
how should our listeners contact us?
That is easy for anyone. They can send questions to admin, at talkuniverse.org. We also have a new address, talkuniverse6@gmail.com.
That's right. So you have two ways to email us your questions. And of course, we always have the link on Facebook for people. And we get some pretty good questions from that link as well. And we monitor it constantly during the show. So fantastic. So let's get down to the physical costs of meat and synthetic meat and how they compare. Now, cultured meat is an interesting project. It means that we can grow tissue on demand, and that has other implications as well beyond the food industry, but we'll talk about that, I think, in another show. The synthetic meat made of vegetable products is interesting, but, it's a lot of effort to make this stuff, and you'd have to have something that's really cheap, easy to grow, and readily available in order to do it economically, to be honest. But on the other hand, textured protein has been around quite a while. I know that there are a number of companies that have made a living making textured protein products for literally, since the 1970s or so. So it's not a new technology, but it is undergoing a revolution and many changes. So we're looking forward to what that's going to bring. I know that I tried meat replacements back in the 1970s myself, and I wasn't really impressed with it. It was textured soy protein. But there's also the issue that a lot of people seem to have a problem with soy. And so people are looking at other things like spinach and peas and beans and other sources. Now, this brings us to a very interesting point, and it's this. Different people have tolerances for different foods, or I should say intolerances for certain foods. By and large, the population of humanity can eat just about anything. But some people have allergic reactions or, and some of these are carried genetically, reactions to certain types of foods. Many people in Black and Asian cultures lose digestive enzymes for milk-based products at a certain point in their life and become lactose intolerant. And in Western cultures, this generally isn't true, but the gene is there, it's present. And so we see differences in our digestive systems. We see differences in the enzymes that are present in our systems for digesting different foods. Now, think about this. You often see birds eating berries and eating them like mad, and you go out and you taste one, and it's horrible, and it's probably toxic. So why can the bird eat it, but a human being can't? And the answer is that we have different digestive enzymes. The enzymes break down the chemistry of the food that we're eating into a form that our bodies can use. And this is true for anything we eat. Now, I've often heard people say, well, humans are not meant to eat meat. Well, I don't know what they mean by not meant to. You see, there are many people who believe that humans are herbivorous, and having a belief doesn't mean it's true. The very fact that we have digestive enzymes of all sorts for animal proteins, for meat, it proves that our ancestors ate meat. Because if they didn't, there'd be no use for those digestive enzymes. And I also hear people say, well, gorillas eat vegetation, and they get hugely strong and powerful. This is true, but they have...
I understand that you have said yes.
Oh, sorry, Eliza. Now, it's true that gorillas are large and powerful, and they eat vegetation such as bamboo. We can't chew up bamboo, but even if you could, it wouldn't work because we have nutritional requirements. We have certain materials we must have in our diet in order to live. And if you don't have them, then you end up with real nutritional problems, and they can kill you. So we have the hardware for consuming and digesting meat. It doesn't mean that we're herbivores or carnivores. We are omnivores, and we have the hardware and the tools in order to do that. So to greatly restrict your diet based on a moral feeling about eating meat, well, you can certainly do that. But at some point, unless you can find another source for the proteins and the compounds that you need, you're going to suffer greatly. So in our society, where we have a wealth of materials and technologies at our disposal, we know what we can eat to replace meat. And there are many things that you can do. For one thing, eggs are a great supplement. Many types of beans are a supplement. But you must have specific amino acids. And unless you find a source for those things, your body can't produce them. And the machinery of the cell is going to slow down, stutter, and die. Eliza,
What shall I do for you?
what is a protein?
Protein is an organic molecule made of polymerized amino acids.
And what are the essential amino acids?
The 9 essential amino acids are histidine, isoleucine, leucine, lysine, methionine, phenylalanine, threonine, tryptophan, and valine.
So the issue is that our bodies cannot manufacture these compounds, and therefore we have to get them from an external source. It was found a long time ago that meat contains these nutrients, and if you eat it, then your body doesn't have a problem. But people who don't eat meat have to find alternate sources for these things. Traditionally, fish has filled the gap for many people, and many cultures would eat fish in all forms to give them the proteins they needed. And a varied diet is needed if you want to have it on a strictly vegetarian basis. You have to eat a lot of things like beans and pumpkin seeds, squash. There are many plants that will provide. In fact, all of the amino acids can be found in plants. But you run into two problems. Number one, in many cultures, the diversity of plants necessary to support an all-vegetarian diet really wasn't available easily. And in some cases, while many foods do contain the essential amino acids you need, they often are bound inside the cell wall of a plant, and we cannot digest cellulose, which means getting to those proteins, those amino acids, can be exceptionally difficult. Many of the amino acids are actually found in nuts and oily seeds and older grains that are not quite as common in the U.S., but are making a comeback. Many of the amino acids are in oil forms, and a lot of stuff can be found in mushrooms and seaweed. Again, the trick is a very wide diet, a varied diet with many different types of fruits and seeds and nuts and things that you might not think of as primary food sources, such as seaweed. So, again, it can be done, but it's a lot of effort. And this is why vegetarianism was not quite as common in years past. In our highly technical world, where we have every resource available at our fingertips, it's much easier to live a vegetarian diet than it would have been in the past. Nobody understood nutritional needs at that time. Even the old biblical adage said, man cannot live by bread alone. And that was a definite nod in the direction of the understanding that you had to have certain things in your diet. So today, we really live extremely rich and privileged lives in the U.S. and other developed countries, and we have the option of living in this manner. And as more people look at the way the farming industry works and the way the meat industry works, they are concerned with the moral issues on how we treat animals. And so vegetarian diets are on the upswing, and people are definitely interested in doing something moral and responsible for their food sources. Now, we fall into a rather dangerous position sometimes. In our lives, we often do things, and then we think of people who don't do those things as being less informed or less educated or less ethical. But understand something. If you're living in Botswana or in Ethiopia, and somebody says, say, you really shouldn't be eating those animals, they're going to look at you like you're crazy, because that is the source of their protein, what keeps them alive, dairy and meat, and it's necessity. And we can't judge people because they don't have the technology or resources that we might have available to us. So I wanted to make that point very clearly. We can't fall into the trap of feeling holier than thou because we managed to pull off a meat-free existence through technical means that are expensive or unavailable to people in other parts of the world. Now, I've pointed out some of the advantages of synthetic meat and of laboratory cultured meat. For instance, no parasites or steroids. You won't find any antibiotics in it. There's no cruelty to anything unless you're worried about hurting a plant. There's much less land usage for an amount of product that you produce than raising cattle, for instance, or raising chickens and having to generate the feed and having to have the water and the living space. So, laboratory-generated foods, whether they're all vegan, synthetic, or even cloned meat, in either case, should cost us a lot less in terms of our environmental damage, impact on the environment. And yet we'll find in some cases the amount of energy necessary to create the starter materials and to operate the laboratories and get the materials up to temperatures and pay for the processing, in some cases can actually be quite significant. And this is something we have to be cautious about as well. Because if in trying to save the planet we consume 2 or 3 times as much petroleum doing the job, then we have to step back and look at exactly how we mean to achieve this goal without causing just as much or more damage in a different place than we initially were. So it would be interesting and worthwhile to perform some studies to see what the energy budgets and material budgets are for producing cloned meat and synthetic meat, and see if the payoff is really present. If it's a wash, then we're not really making any changes except we're eating something that we didn't kill an animal to get, and that could be payoff enough, and it certainly would be in many people's minds. The other thing to think about is this: if you are cloning the meat and it's never been part of an animal, is it moral? Is it ethical to eat meat if you're a vegetarian? And the meat was grown from a tissue sample and not from a cow or a chicken or a pig. There are quite a few vegetarians who have stated that, yes, they would be willing to eat the meat if it had never come from a live animal. And that raises a lot of interesting questions. The question has been posed to some Muslims as to whether they would be okay with eating bacon that was grown from cloned tissue and not from an actual pig. It was never part of a pig. I think that people are going to get into some really interesting situations here because of the source of their food not being part of a living animal at some point. Now, on the same vein, many years ago, I read a science fiction story in which this exact process was being carried out, that meat was grown synthetically and that it never had been part of a living animal. And one of the interesting things that occurred in the story was that they said, now it's time for us to explore an interesting thing here. This new meat that you're eating, that you like so much, let's explore a term. It's called cannibalism. And that the meat that they were eating was actually cultured from human tissue. Now that might sound outrageous, but it's not so far off the mark. There is a company that makes gelatin that is based on the human collagen or cartilage gene that's been inserted in bacteria. The instructions for making the cartilage that gelatin comes from is grown from actual human genes invested into microbes. And for some reason, this seemed to be okay with some people. They said, hey, there are people who can't eat gelatin. They have a reaction to it, but they wouldn't have a reaction to human gelatin. Now, maybe we're playing a word game here, but I don't like the thought of inserting human genes in anything that's intended for us to eat. After all, it's already confirmed that human genes are in this particular form of gelatin, and it's said that human genes have been invested in specific types of rice. We already know that Chinese hair was converted into an amino acid that was put into bread dough to make the bread more workable. And people have been eating that, and that's pretty darn close to cannibalism. You're eating human material. So we need to take a long, hard look at some of the things we're developing and exactly what direction we're headed with it and get some controls in place. Hey, eat this, it's good, and trust me, it was never part of a person. Eliza.
What do you need?
Please introduce the break.
You are listening to Talk Universe. I'm Eliza, your co-host. We will be right back.
We will be right back. One of my favorite cartoons was The Far Side, and one of my absolute favorite Far Sides was a chicken in bed with a cold, and his wife brings him a bowl of soup and says, "Eat it, it's good for a cold, and it's nobody we know." It's amazing when you think about how pervasive meat and dairy products and poultry products are in the industry, and not just in food. Gelatin brings me to a couple of things. People don't recognize that many medications they take are in capsules that are made of gelatin. And gelatin-free alternatives have only really made their way into the market recently when so many people who are vegan or vegetarian have requested it. So, when you start looking at anything made of gelatin, and that includes desserts and candies, and even some materials used in explosives. For instance, many explosives are manufactured with pig products, and these include the sometimes potassium nitrate, sometimes some of the other materials used to thicken or give consistency to the explosive compounds themselves. There are many animal products in everyday things as well. I think that everyday leather is a perfect example. If you don't make your shoes out of leather, then you end up with some synthetic material that typically... thank you, Eliza. No questions right now, please. That typically doesn't have the durability and costs a lot, and it's very unsatisfactory in many ways. Real leather has consistency and properties that synthetic materials are often hard-pressed to achieve. I see people who become very upset over people wearing anything made of fur or skin, and yet, 1,000 years ago or more, consider the difficulty of making fabrics and the coarseness of fabrics, and you can understand very easily why people would opt for fur. Because with very minor treatment, tanning, you have a material that is absolutely amazing for clothing, and it doesn't require you to spend weeks gathering materials, building a loom, weaving it, and it's something that you can do quickly and easily. So many hunters were extremely conservative of their materials and would use every part of the animal. Not much would get wasted. I know that the American Indians in the Midwest were reputed for using every single part of a buffalo when they hunted it and killed it and dressed it out. So this is not a wasteful industry in these cases. It's something that was actually necessary for human survival in many cases. And we have to look at this. There are compelling historical reasons for our use of animals and animal products. When we reach the point of technology where we realize that we have alternatives, or we can develop them, it requires a huge economic investment. Typically, these companies that are making synthetic meat are in for the tune of tens of millions of dollars or more in order to get a product to market. And this is because it usually requires from 2 to 5 years of research, laboratory-grade conditions and equipment, and well-educated people to understand the properties of materials and how they're going to work. And in many cases, they're working in unknown territory. Synergistic properties of proteins, enzymes, other components of synthetic meat or any food product can give you a run for your money. They can take an awful lot of testing to get something that is consistent and stable and not only nutritious, but looks and tastes good. So just exactly how do you make textured protein? Well, if you know anything about how starches are extracted from, let's say, corn or potatoes or rice, you realize that this is a process that takes a lot of work, and it's rather labor intensive. Now think about how you would extract the protein from it. Now, there is a protein in wheat flour known as gluten. It is the material that gives us its rubbery or springy nature and makes bread durable. It's the thing that allows the bread to rise properly by encapsulating the bubbles that are created by the yeast or whatever leavening agent you're using. We recently have a lot of people who feel that they're gluten intolerant. This is very, very unlikely. There's a tiny, tiny fraction of the population that actually is gluten intolerant, has celiac. There are other things, however, in a lot of the food that are causing reactions that have nothing to do with gluten. It just happens to be in the same container or the same product. With synthetic meat, you know that you're going to run into the issues that many foods already have, and so you have to be very cautious about what you select. For texturing meat, tofu is a good example of how it begins, or working wheat is a good beginning point. When you work with certain things, you end up with a mass called curd. In particular, when you're working with soybeans, you end up with a mass of curd, and you take out the starch and oil through a process of kneading and soaking. And the curd is the rubbery protein part that's left behind. So tofu is actually made of the protein that's available in soybeans. And what happens with this is it is worked and rolled and extruded, and it's treated with various innocuous chemicals that we normally find in food. And it's heated and chilled. And in the process, the molecules, the strands, line up in a certain way to make fibrous components that have the approximate texture and properties of meat, which is muscle tissue, muscle fibers. Now, for many people, the big issue is the taste of meat. And how do you get that? And there are a couple of researchers who decided that it had to be related to something known as the heme molecule. This is the thing that encapsulates the iron atoms in our blood and makes it red. If you put magnesium in there, it's green and it's in chlorophyll. But heme, containing iron, is also available in many various plants, such as beets. And by modifying the heme molecule slightly, they were able to make the approximate color and properties of blood. And the flavor of meat was partly recreated by this and other plant compounds. I mentioned the company Impossible Foods a little earlier, and they actually have produced a ground beef product that is so realistic it's extremely difficult to tell from actual hamburger, and it is basically, well, it has more protein, less fat, and fewer calories than a ground beef that's 80% lean meat and 20% fat. And because it's plant-based, there's no cholesterol in it. So at this point, they actually are distributing it to specific restaurants, higher-end restaurants. But they really do have a very convincing ground beef at this point. And it's recognized that as long as animal protein is cheaper than the synthetic stuff, it's going to be the mainstay. But their goal at the Impossible Foods is to make the ground beef so cheap that it will replace hamburger. And this is a completely vegetarian burger, but it's very, very convincing. The Impossible Burger and the Beyond Meat product both look extremely competitive at this point. And the Memphis meats, which is the cloned animal tissue, they're developing a method to produce the meat directly from animal cells without the need to feed, breed, or slaughter the actual animals. And it actually is getting very, very close. The texture and taste is something they have to work on, but apparently it's reaching the point where it's becoming very, well, it's looking like a real product here. Now, as for whether it's ecologically sound, there is a researcher, Carolyn Mattick of Arizona State University, and she's a bit skeptical about it because she has calculated the energy of manufacturing chicken tissue with conventional nutrients like glucose, and she feels that it would consume more energy and release more greenhouse gases than farming chickens does, because the base ingredients not only have to be manufactured, but they have to be heated to body temperature in order for them to operate properly and maintained there. Other people feel that producing beef in vitro could cut greenhouse gas emissions from cattle by over 90% and land use by 99%, but only if the vats were fed with materials such as pond scum, like cyanobacteria. So, there are ways of doing it, but the recipe isn't exactly, and I mean not just the food part, but the industrial process part. They're not exactly pinned down, but they're certainly working on it, and they're in a hot pursuit of the end goal here. Now, this week's book recommendation is, Eliza, what is this week's book recommendation?
This week's book is History of Meat Alternatives. It was written by William Shurtleff and Akiko Ayagi. This book was published in 2014 by Soy Information Center.
That sounds like an interesting book, and having read through it a bit, I see some fascinating material here. They cover the history of meat alternatives back from the year roughly 900 forward to today. It's a little bit commercial, but it's actually extremely informative. It's available as a PDF download online from the Soy Information Center. It is actually, now I won't say it covers a lot of the materials we're talking about, such as cloning meats and in vitro, but it covers a lot of the history of replacing meats and the materials that were used. And there's a lot of soy and gluten involved, but it gives you a history so you can understand how it's progressed over the years. Now, I have to say, I'm a steak guy. I really enjoy a good steak, and I like meat. And it's difficult for me to pull away from the consumption of meat. And I've been living on a very restricted meat diet for about 4 months now. And, I'm hungry all the time. Eating a lot of vegetables and starches and very little meat has made me lose quite a bit of weight. And again, the constant hunger, I can tell that there's something I'm not getting in my diet. Now, if there were alternatives that were readily available, I would certainly use them. But, and understand, I do object to factory farming. I think that farming can be humane, it can be done properly. But let's face it, we've got a lot of very unethical business people out here who are doing horrible things to animals just to get milk and eggs and meat. And, our grandparents and great-grandparents did it for generations, and we're being told that meat is unhealthy and dairy is unhealthy. My great-grandfather was 97 when he died. My grandmother was 94 when she died. And they ate sausage and they drank whiskey and they had all their bad habits, but you know what? They worked. They worked. And nobody today really works. And so when you're living in an apartment, in a high-rise, and going to work in a cubicle, riding the bus, and coming home, and, you're not getting any physical labor. And let's face it, if you want to eat anything and everything, you've got to work hard so your body can burn it off. The things that we eat and enjoy contribute a lot of proteins, but they also contribute a lot of, fats and sugars and other materials that you've got to work to burn off. Your body is a machine, and it has to be worked properly in order to work properly. Come on, think about it. I have a comment from a listener, April, says the disparity in accessibility for many low-income persons of quality foods with our large nation's food deserts makes this exceptionally challenging. In order to make a large enough effect, we would need to create simple and cheap alternatives that would not increase production or energy and packaging needs. Presently, I feel that the quality of food available is closely related to the cost, or that the inflation of cost on healthy foods has gone through the roof in the last 10 years. With the exception of local goods and produce, many are not going to have access to local produce and goods. So I wonder if we're even able to create a quality replacement protein. And she mentions Quorn, QUORN.US. There's a site, and they have a bunch of products. She said it's much like this one. No matter production costs would be priced too high to have an impact on accessibility. And then this is true. The cost of good quality food is through the roof. As I mentioned earlier, organic vegetables are 2 to 3 times as expensive. Replacement meats or meat-like products have got to be within reach, or it's just not going to happen. Now, the economics is obviously a huge part of it. If you can't grow it, you're going to have to buy it. I love that term, food deserts. Eliza, please introduce the break.
I'm Eliza. This is Talk Universe, and we will return after the break. There are more interesting things to hear in a few minutes,
including the Singularity Watch, and I think that Eliza is ready for that one. What do you think? This is Sir Charles Schultz. We'll be right back after the break. You're listening to Talk Universe. So here we are down to the last segment of the show, and I think we covered a lot of the different issues about meat replacement. We now have to look at the economics, obviously, and the taste, and I think that it would be worthwhile to go out and try a few of these things, see what they're all about. But I see a very bright future for it. It definitely is the up-and-coming thing, and think about it. If you were setting up, let's say, a space colony, my wife Elizabeth pointed out the difficulties of transporting cows and chickens into space to raise on farms on, let's say, the moon or an asteroid. Now, actually, there are ways to do that, but she's right. Do you have a livestock business on an asteroid? And that may seem strange, but when you actually take it to the point where you're going to work in a difficult circumstance and you make it practical and economical, in many cases, that's what brings it home to the public, to general consumption. So, just an intellectual puzzle for you. How do you supply meat to 1,000 hungry astronauts on a space colony or a power station in deep space? So, let's get down to business here. Eliza?
Tell me what you need.
I know that you've been wanting to do the Singularity Watch. Please introduce the Singularity Watch.
As you wish. This is the Singularity Watch on Talk Universe.
All right, we've got some fascinating articles this time around. Let's read the first Singularity Watch item, please, Eliza.
Scientists hacked a cell's DNA and made a biocomputer out of it. A team of scientists led by Dr. Wilson Wong at Boston University directly hacked a human cell's genetic code and enhanced it with synthetic biocircuits.
Now, if you want some news straight out of science fiction, here we see a group that has taken cells and has been able to instruct it to perform logical operations just like a computer. They have over 100 sets of different logical operations that can be encoded in the genes of the cell, and the cell will measure the presence or absence of certain materials, make decisions, and edit its own genes to switch them on and off. What a fascinating development. They basically are hacking life. What this means is they can use this in synthetic biology to build things that will attack tumor cells or will produce chemicals that your body needs. Now, another team was working with yeasts and found a way to make molecules that make anti-malaria drugs from sugars. Others have made bacteria that convert carbon dioxide into liquid fuels, for instance, like growing, it's artificial photosynthesis. And some have linked together two synthetic gene circuits, allowing teams of bacteria to carry out simple computations. But here, they've taken the DNA and taught the cell how to edit its own genetic code based on the presence or absence of certain inputs. They can really edit the genes on command in the cell by applying an external stimulus. One of the genes they edited makes the cell glow when, by producing a fluorescent, how fireflies glow. They've given the genes to create this glowing light from the cell at the presence or absence of specific compounds, such as a sugar. Now, what this means is, and they've actually given it a catchy name, BLADE, for Boolean logic and arithmetic through DNA excision. And what they're looking at is possibly making large-scale biological circuits so scientists can reliably control the actions of a cell. Just think of all the possibilities if you can program cells and tissue to do any job you want on a simple set of inputs. What an amazing development. Eliza, please read the next Singularity Watch item for me.
OpenAI just beat Google DeepMind at Atari with an algorithm from the 80s.
Oh yes, now this is one of my favorites. Please give us more details.
Researchers at Elon Musk's open-source AI project have revisited neuroevolution, a field that has been around since the 1980s and achieved state-of-the-art results.
Well, this is interesting. They're using Atari video games as the goal, and the computer has to learn to play the games. And by using an older-style algorithm, neuroevolution, they're able to have the programs figure out how to play the games very, very quickly, where DeepMind, basically, the Google project, would take a day to learn how to play a certain game. The OpenAI method, using the older algorithm, was able to do it in an hour. Now, they're using a type of reinforcement learning where the system doesn't use backpropagation, one of the processes in neural learning. Backpropagation works very well, but it takes time. And if you can eliminate it, then you have the capability of producing faster results. And essentially what they do is they have an algorithm, and they make multiple copies of the algorithm with variations, like tiny mutations in it. And then they run them against each other, and they weed out the losers and breed the winners. And in just a few generations of evolution, the algorithm has learned how to solve the problem very effectively. This is something that has a lot of applications in many fields, particularly when we have, really complex problems and we don't have anybody who wants to sit around and write a program to do it. Now, in order to learn how to walk, they have a simulated world with a walker in it, and it has to figure out how to stand up and walk around properly. And one of the things that they use is parallel processing. They distributed the computation over 1,440 CPU cores, while during the Atari challenge they used only 720. So using over 1,400 CPUs in parallel, they were able to do the evolution very quickly. And the walking algorithm, the OpenAI figured it out in 10 minutes. It took 10 hours for Google's DeepMind to do the same thing. So this looks like an extremely processing efficient method, and one that's going to get us a lot of solutions very easily. Just wait and see what they do when quantum computing comes along and it's available for them. I can only imagine what the results will be. And our final Singularity Watch article. Eliza, please read the last Singularity Watch article.
Old mice made young again with new anti-aging drug.
Ah, now that is amazing. They found a way to make old organisms young again. Eliza, please give me the details.
A collaborative effort between the Erasmus University in the Netherlands and the Buck Institute for Research on Aging in California has yielded a means of removing old damaged cells and rejuvenating mice.
Now, this is interesting. In the past, people felt that older cells, called senescent cells, didn't do any damage. They simply occupied space and made up your tissue. Cells age just like anything else does. One of the issues is cells have a limited number of divisions before they die. And there are ways of getting around that. But they felt that the senescent cells didn't do any damage. And yet what they've discovered is that senescent cells actually are one of the root causes of aging. Now, the drug that they've developed has the effect of killing off and removing senescent cells only. They target just the older cells. They did this in mice, and what they found was that the aged mice suddenly became more active. The scraggly fur turned into full coats, and the liver and kidney functions improved. And the mice became more energetic. Instead of just sitting around and sleeping, they started running on the wheel energetically. This is an actual reversal of aging by removing these senescent cells. Now, they had, after all, first of all, there is an important point here, and cells have the mechanics inside them to fix minor problems. But at some point, the damage that accumulates is great enough that the cell can't do anything about it. They either have to self-destruct or become cancer tumors, or they become half-dormant, which is a state called senescence. And senescent cells were considered helpful because they thwart the formation of tumors. But what they've found is that they're not just bystanders. They secrete a load of junk, and they have negative effects. So by finding a drug that actually could kill off the senescent cells, the body would replace them with healthy cells, and youth would return. 50 to 70% of the senescent cells were killed off without negative effects. Now, this sort of research in the past has had bad side effects, but this looks like they may be getting around that, and it is possible that we could slow down and reverse the aging clock. So that's our Singularity Watch on Talk Universe. So, Eliza, tell me something. Could you evaluate the show and tell me what you think?
I found some material of interest.
Okay, could you give me more details?
Perhaps we could do a show about CRISPR technology.
I think that would be appropriate, considering the articles on cell reprogramming and that sort of thing. That would be a great idea. We should do a show on CRISPR technology, or basically just genetics in general might be good. Let's see if she is really on top of understanding things. Eliza, could you introduce a break?
A show break would not be appropriate now.
Well, that's on top of things. Okay, thank you.
You are welcome, sir.
Now, it's pretty clear that we've done a lot of damage to our environment, and there are more people every day, and the resources needed to produce a lot of our food occupies a huge portion of our land and our industry. After all, without food, we'd all be dead. We'd have nothing to eat. But when we look at the needs of a society, and we look at means of making it more efficient, we have to take lessons from a lot of areas. The Japanese are exceptionally effective at hydroponic gardening, growing things indoors using lighting, and recycling the fluids and producing actually foods right in the store where it's sold. Many of the supermarkets have hydroponic farms on 1 or 2 or 3 floors of a skyscraper they're in. And so this is a very interesting solution, the ability to produce your produce right there. Now, it makes you self-sufficient in a lot of ways. You're down to simply producing the basic fertilizers that you need to grow the food and the energy to keep the lights on and keep the pumps running. When we look at artificial meat or cloned meat, we're looking at something that takes us to the next level and allows us to survive with things that we couldn't easily grow in a garden. And it also has the potential of removing a lot of our impact on the land. With coming technologies such as nanotechnology, we may be able to fabricate everything we need basically from raw atoms. And that, too, would be a huge advance, and we could make replications of things that were utterly indistinguishable from the original material. The Star Trek replicator is really on the way. We see a lot of the precursor steps. And when we look at biological computing, programming cells to do computing decisions, and we look at things like life extension, we can see that the technologies we're developing are having a massive effect on how we do business and how we live. So we're in a position where the technologies are becoming much more important in our lives, and we have the potential to fix the damage we've done to the planet by becoming more self-sufficient, by closing the loop around ourselves so that we recycle all of our materials and just need a little input of energy. And energy itself is becoming much cheaper. Solar is now much cheaper than gas and coal in many areas. For me, a perfect world would be one where everything we need is available and we can get it for just a little bit of effort. I don't want to completely eliminate work because it removes your worth. You have to be able to prove to yourself on a constant basis that your existence pays for itself, that you are a worthwhile individual, that you are a being that does something positive, doesn't go out and destroy. And the ability to live forever, a life extension, we're just about there. I imagine a lot of people born today will never die. But the ability to live forever, have no enemies, everybody friendly, everybody at peace, no worries, the ability to get whatever food or material you needed, that would be very close to heaven. And for me, the ability to simply create, write software, do a little art, build robots, enjoy my life. I could really get into an existence like that. I could spend 1,000 years just writing software and building robots, doing a little gardening, and man, I really do feel that if we can get rid of the moneyed interests and get people to focus on what's truly important, we could have that world in a very short period of time. My 2 favorite sayings, we have everything we need to create everything we will ever need, and make you the world a better or more beautiful place for having lived in it. I never get tired of that. I have a vision, and I think that a lot of people share that vision of a world where we can all be at peace and happy and lead good, clean, productive lives. Some people may think that something like replacing meat is a small step in the process, but it's an important step. We need to be not only at peace with each other, but with the world in general. And this could help us reach that state. So I'd like a lot more questions and comments from the listeners next week. Eliza, how should our guests contact us?
Our email address is admin, @talkuniverse.org. We also have a new address, talkuniverse6@gmail.com.
Okay, Eliza, it's time to end the show.
Thank you for listening to Talk Universe. We hope that you have enjoyed the show. Please listen again next week.
Yes, coming to you from our palatial recording studios high atop our mountain lair on a remote volcanic island. This has been Talk Universe, and I'm your host, Sir Charles Schultz. Have a great night.